On August 14, 2024, a search dog stopped dead in its tracks at the edge of a frozen ravine in the Chugach Range, Alaska, and began to howl. It wasn't the bark of a find, it was the sound of a physical rejection of what lay in the snow. 6 months after she disappeared into the most unforgiving wilderness on the continent, Elena Vance was found sitting upright in a shallow ice cave. She was wearing only a thin base layer. Her core temperature was 74 degrees. Her eyes were open, tracking the movement of the rescue team, but she did not speak. This is where it stops making sense. A human body cannot survive 6 months of Alaskan winter without shelter, fire, or specialized gear. Elena Vance had none of those. But here is the detail the Park Service suppressed until the 2025 inquiry. When the paramedics cut away her frozen leggings, they found her skin was perfectly clean. No frostbite, no windburn, no signs of a woman who had spent 180 days fighting for her life in the sub-zero dark. How does a person vanish from a marked trail and reappear half a year later as if they had been placed there 10 minutes ago? Before she was a ghost in the ice, Elena Vance was a logistical expert for a global shipping firm. She was 32, a marathon runner, and a woman who carried a satellite transponder even on day hikes. She was the person who did everything right. On February 12, 2024, she parked her silver SUV at the Crow Pass trailhead. She logged her route in the trail register, a simple 12-mile out and back. She had 3 liters of water, 2,000 calories of dense protein bars, and a thermal emergency blanket. At 10:14 a.m., a GoPro mounted to another hiker's chest caught Elena in the background of a frame. She is smiling. She is checking her watch. She looks like a woman with a plan. By 4 p.m., she hadn't returned. By 6 p.m., the first blizzard of the season hit the pass, dropping visibility to 3 feet. Search and rescue teams were grounded for 72 hours. When the skies cleared, they found her SUV. It was buried in a drift, but the doors were unlocked. Her cell phone was sitting on the dashboard, fully charged. Her keys were in the ignition. Think about that. You are 30 minutes from a record-breaking storm. You are a safety-conscious hiker. Do you leave your phone and your keys in an unlocked car and walk into the tree line? The police report from February 15th noted that there were no footprints leading away from the vehicle. The snow around the SUV was undisturbed by human weight, yet the driver's side window was rolled down exactly 2 inches. Investigators call this a lure profile. It's when a scene looks like someone was interrupted in the middle of a routine action, but the physical evidence suggests they were never there to begin with. For the next 3 weeks, 400 volunteers and 3 thermal imaging drones scanned every square inch of the 3-mile radius around the trailhead. They found nothing. No dropped gear. No biological markers, no scent cone for the dogs to follow. Elena Vance had effectively ceased to exist at 10:15 a.m. on February 12th. The trail camera footage changed the scope of the search from a rescue to a criminal inquiry, but the Alaskan state troopers hit a wall that defied physical laws. If that was Elena in the teal jacket, she had traveled 14 miles across the Eagle River drainage in the dead of winter, an area where the snowpack was 12 feet deep and the crust was too thin to support a human without snowshoes. She had no snowshoes. Investigators analyzed the stride length in that 3:11 a.m. frame and found it was nearly 5 feet long. To maintain that pace in those conditions, a human would need the caloric intake of a grizzly and the cardiovascular capacity of an Olympic athlete. Elena was fit, but she wasn't superhuman. This detail wasn't released until 2025. Ask yourself why the authorities told the public the footage was inconclusive while privately sending it to a biomechanics lab in Seattle. At the 8-minute mark of this investigation, we have to look at the thermal void. This is a term search teams use when the environment is so cold that a living body should glow like a beacon on infrared sensors. During the February searches, the drones covered the ravine where she was eventually found no less than 60 times. Those sensors can pick up the heat signature of a field mouse under 2 feet of snow. They found nothing. No heat, no movement, just the flat, dead blue of frozen earth. Yet, when she was discovered in August, the moss beneath her body was green. Not dormant, not frozen, living, vibrant green. In a climate where the ground stays permafrosted until late June, There was a localized heat source keeping a 6-foot circle of vegetation alive while the woman sitting on it was hovering at the edge of biological death. But here is what the lead investigator, Mark Vance, Elena's uncle and a retired detective who refused to leave the mountain, found in July, 1 month before the discovery. He was trekking through a sector the official search had abandoned. He found a piece of yellow surveyor's tape tied to a branch. On it, written in a permanent marker that hadn't faded despite the sun and snow, were the coordinates for the ravine. The handwriting matched the logbook Elena signed at the trailhead on February 12th. But the tape itself was a brand only sold at a hardware store in Anchorage, a store Elena hadn't visited, and a brand of tape she didn't have in her pack. The tape was tied in a knot known as a clove hitch, a professional climber's knot. Elena didn't climb. She was a trail runner. The investigation took a darker turn when the digital forensics on her recovered phone were finally bypassed in May. There was a single draft unsent in her messages, timestamped at 10:18 a.m. on the day she vanished. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a sequence of 12 numbers, a set of GPS coordinates. When the troopers mapped them, they pointed to the center of the Pacific Ocean, 3,000 miles away. There was no text, no context, just the location of a patch of empty water. At 10:19 a.m., her phone's accelerometer recorded a sudden, violent spike event, as if the phone had been dropped from a height of 20 feet, followed by 60 seconds of absolute stillness before the device was placed back on the dashboard of her SUV. The keys were then inserted into the ignition, but the engine was never turned. None of this explains what was found in her pocket when she was finally pulled from the ice cave in August. Inside her teal jacket, which was dry and smelled of ozone, was a handful of berries. These weren't dried or preserved. They were fresh Rubus chamaemoris, cloudberries. In Alaska, cloudberries fruit in late July and August. If Elena had been in that cave since February, she would have been surrounded by snow and dead wood. For her to have fresh berries in her pocket, she would have had to pick them within 48 hours of being found. Yet medical examiners confirmed her stomach was completely empty. She hadn't eaten in weeks. Her muscles had atrophied to the point of a long-term coma patient, but her skin showed no signs of the bed sores or pressure points that occur when a body is immobile for months. You're standing in that ravine now. It's August, but the air coming out of that ice cave is 30 degrees colder than the surrounding forest. You see a woman you've been looking for since the winter. She's staring at you. She doesn't recognize your face, even though you're her uncle. You reach out to touch her shoulder, and the first thing you notice isn't the cold, it's the vibration. Mark Vance later admitted in a leaked deposition that Elena's body wasn't shivering, it was humming, a low-frequency resonance that he could feel in his own teeth. It didn't feel like a person, he said. It felt like a tuning fork that had just been struck. The system, the Park Service and the state troopers, immediately cordoned off the ravine. They didn't call a local ambulance. They called a federal transport team from Elmendorf Air Force Base. By the time the local news helicopters arrived, the site was scrubbed. They even took the moss. They told the public Elena was a miracle of survival, a story of grit and the human spirit. They didn't mention the coordinates, the clove hitch, or the fact that when she was weighed at the hospital, Elena Vance weighed exactly 112 pounds, the same weight she was on February 12th, 6 months without food, and she hadn't lost an ounce of body mass. The federal transport of Elena Vance wasn't a medical evacuation, it was a containment. While the public celebrated the miracle in the Chugach, the reality inside the secured wing of the Anchorage Medical Facility was a descent into the impossible. Doctors expected a victim of extreme exposure, necrosis, electrolyte collapse, cognitive shattering. Instead, they found a biological impossibility. Elena's blood work, processed on August 17th, showed a complete absence of ketones. In a starving body, the liver breaks down fat into ketones for fuel. Elena had none. It was as if her metabolism had simply paused on February 12th and resumed the moment the search dog howled at the cave entrance. This is the theory no one wants to believe. They call it the compression event. The theory suggests Elena Vance didn't spend 180 days in the wilderness. She spent 180 days somewhere else, or more disturbingly, she spent no time at all. But if that's true, how do we explain the cloudberries? How do we explain the physical atrophy of her muscles if no time had passed for her? A new piece of evidence surfaced in September 2025, leaked by a technician from the biomechanics lab. They had analyzed the audio from the GoPro footage, the one that captured Elena smiling at 10:14 a.m. When slowed down by 400%, there is a sound beneath the wind. It's a rhythmic mechanical pulsing, 18.5 hertz, well below the range of human hearing but enough to cause physical distress and hallucinations. Forensic analysts found that this same frequency was recorded on a seismic sensor 3 miles away at the exact second Elena's phone recorded that 20-foot drop event. But here is what the police didn't release until the inquiry. They found a second set of keys in Elena's pocket. They were identical to her car keys, right down to the microscopic wear patterns on the metal. But when they tried to use this second set to start her SUV, the car's computer rejected them. The chip inside the key wasn't faulty. It was programmed for a vehicle with a VIN, vehicle identification number, that, according to manufacturer records, does not exist. A car that was never built. The obsessed civilian in this story, a retired park ranger named Elias Thorne, began tracking similar disappearances across the Pacific Northwest. He found a pattern the system worked tirelessly to obscure. Every 11 years, a competent person vanishes from a high-latitude trailhead. They always leave their electronics behind. They are always found, if they are found at all, in a state of suspended animation within a 3-mile radius of their vehicle. Thorne pointed out that the coordinates Elena texted, that empty patch of the Pacific, align perfectly with a tectonic subduction zone that hasn't moved in a century. Theory 2, the Elena who returned is not the Elena who left. This theory gained traction when her sister Sarah was finally allowed to visit the hospital. Sarah reported that Elena's eyes, originally a deep hazel, were now a flat uniform gray. More chillingly, Elena had lost the ability to recognize written language. She could speak perfectly, though her voice had dropped an octave. But when shown a photo of her own signature, she screamed. She didn't see letters. She saw, in her words, the teeth of the mountain. No one has explained the thermal void found at the recovery site, and no one has tried to explain the presence of the surveyor's tape. But on October 1st, 2025, a maintenance worker at the hospital found a series of markings scratched into the underside of Elena's bed frame. They weren't words. They were a series of dots and lines, a map of the Chugach Range, but with one glaring error. It showed a peak that hasn't existed since a massive landslide in 1964. The 2025 inquiry into the Elena Vance case was meant to provide closure, but it only served to codify the dread. The final report, a 400-page document heavily redacted, contains a single footnote concerning the recovery of Elena's gear. When the federal team processed her backpack, which was found neatly folded at the foot of her hospital bed 3 days after she was admitted, despite no one having seen her enter with it, they found her thermal emergency blanket. It had been used. But the silver mylar wasn't creased, it was fused. The material had undergone a molecular change, turning it into a substance with the density of lead but the flexibility of silk. The system stopped looking for a missing person in February Divitukstoshi Divdesmit Chetri. They started managing a site. A leaked internal memo from the Department of the Interior dated March 12th, months before Elena was found, referred to the Crow Pass area as an active distortion zone. They knew she wasn't dead. They knew she was in transit. The theory of localized chronological displacement suggests that for 6 months, Elena Vance was held in a state where time does not move at a linear 1-to-1 ratio. But what does this mean for you? On November 14, 2025, Elena Vance walked out of the Anchorage facility. She didn't check out. A security camera in the hallway showed her walking toward the exit at 3 a.m. As she passed under the fluorescent lights, the video feed flickered and died. When it returned 3 seconds later, the hallway was empty. The motion sensors never triggered the sliding glass doors. She has not been seen since. However, 3 weeks ago, a hiker on the Crow Pass Trail found a silver SUV parked at the trailhead. It was an exact match for Elena's car, down to the license plate. But Elena's car is currently sitting in a police impound lot in Anchorage. The car at the trailhead was unlocked, the keys were in the ignition, and on the dashboard, a cell phone was sitting fully charged, displaying a draft message with 12 numbers, a new set of coordinates. These coordinates don't point to the Pacific Ocean, they point to a residential address in a suburb outside of Seattle, your suburb. No one has explained why the DNA samples taken from Elena in August showed a third strand forming in her mitochondrial sequence. No one has explained why the cloudberries in her pocket had a half-life, decaying into a gray ash within minutes of being exposed to the hospital's pressurized air. And no one has explained why, if you look closely at the smiling photo from 10:14 a.m. on the day she vanished, the reflection in her sunglasses doesn't show the trail ahead of her. It shows a 6-level concrete parking structure on the corner of Mason and 5th, a building that wouldn't be finished until 2026. The Crow Pass Trail remains open to the public. The Park Service has installed new safety towers every half mile. They tell you they are for emergency communication, but if you stand close to one, you can hear it, that low-frequency hum, that 18.5 hertz pulse. It isn't there to help you call out, it's there to keep the shimmer stable. You've probably driven past a place like this today. You think you're safe because you have a plan. But Elena Vance had all of those things. The trailhead is still there, the SUV is still parked, and somewhere in the Chugach Range a 6-foot circle of moss is turning green in the middle of a blizzard. Don't look for the shimmer, because by the time you see it, you've already been recalibrated.